All right, so we are recording. Obviously, part two with Photoshop, guys. And I know some of you guys are working in the background diligently, and that's great. Especially if you already have some practice with Photoshop. However, if you're entirely new to Photoshop, I'd ask you to pause, right? And of course, pay attention closely. Last time we left off, to be fair, I don't actually remember. I couldn't find the file. I don't think I actually saved it, and I think my computer died before it actually saved it. So I went ahead and just took in another section from last time. And to be honest, I think we got to like the sky. I know we did a couple of things. To be fair, I didn't get to watch my previous videos last time. Do you guys remember what we did? Well, yeah, I know there was 4 of them in Illustrator. That way we could set up the pages. However, when we started talking about Photoshop, we dragged them in just to kind of recap. Obviously, we changed the line weights in Illustrator, but then we selected everything and just literally dragged it. I'm pretty sure we talked about how this turns into a smart object. That's ringing some bells. Honestly, I've done this tutorial so many times that it is kind of hard to remember where I left off versus another one, or even honestly a different semester and things like this. But that being the case, I'm just going to try and dive right into it and show off some of the extra tools that I did definitely want to go over and get this looking actually pretty well. To be fair, there's tons of options and there's many things that we can do in Photoshop. In fact, if you've ever picked up a magazine or seen an advertisement in any case, you've probably seen, of course, Photoshop imagery. In that case. However, when we use it for architecture, very often we use it very slightly, again, to actually emphasize the architecture. We don't want it to get lost in the trees, we don't want it to get lost in the sky, and we definitely don't want it to get lost in the oversaturation that often happens in most of our drawings, right? We often put way too much color, way too much stuff, way too much detail, and very often actually it falls apart. The architecture becomes less resolvable and uncommunicated. So again, we're going to try to do our best to avoid those kinds of issues. However, some of the resources that I wanted to pull up, I know I've brought these up before, but of course these also work as a DWG, and to be fair, Photoshop does open AI files now too, so that's pretty nice, and you can embed them as well. So we're going to put a couple of trees in, we're going to put a couple of people in. Honestly, they got cars and plants and furniture now, and even some AI tools. That's pretty new to me. Another one that I want to talk about is actually this website called Architectures. If you've ever been looking for specific textures, these are all free, and I would definitely write that down. Archi with an I, textures, as in just regularly spelling textures. However, I'm going to do it a little bit old school today because, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of options in here. You can do a lot of things. But to be fair, they do look a little SketchUp-y. But it's not a bad base to start off with in many cases. However, if you're trying to look for, crazy flagstone, keep in mind you will have to get the pro version. I can't remember how much it is a year, and yes, it is a yearly subscription. To be fair, if you're doing this all the time in D3 and D4, then yeah, it's probably worth your while. However, for the most part, I just love Google Images. And I'm going to go ahead and start off with the sky. I do know that I mentioned a little bit last time, so again, a little bit of a recap since I'm having to start over a little bit. But let's go to Google Images and let's put in our sky element. I do know and remember that I brought up Bob Ross, and that of course we start off with the background and move our way towards the foreground. So again, I'm going to do that again today and start off with the sky. However, the first thing that you can do is of course start off with a sky texture, right? To be fair, in a section and an elevation, you want to go with a flat sky as much as possible. And what does that mean, a flat sky? Actually, in fact, if you look at the sky, it looks actually more like a celestial dome due to our perspective vision. And very often it actually looks like a dome. You'll see that the stars actually kind of revolve around you in a way. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely why we get our solar angles and azimuths. Either way, not to talk too deeply about it, but you definitely don't want to go for something like this. That's a hardcore perspective going on, right? You can almost see the vanishing points of the clouds. Not good for an elevation, not good for a section. Great for a perspective. However, we want something generally flat and texturized. Even something like this is more doable and workable with, right? Another way to do it is to try to just find the same colors, the same size clouds. Obviously, that's no good. And that's actually pretty sweet right there. Pretty flat, and don't get me wrong, we're kind of getting that squished perspective, at least in a flat way, and that might be kind of nice, especially towards our horizon line. We don't have a horizon line, unfortunately, in an orthographic view, except for wherever you're looking from. There is no horizontal line. Does anybody know what the horizon is? Quiz question. It's where the sky apparently meets the earth, right? And it creates, of course, a perfectly horizontal line, which is where it derives its name, horizon, right? It sounds very familiar, horizontal. Anyway, but we do need something quite flat. So again, in my case, I'm going to open this up in a new tab and make sure that it's a pretty solid image. It looks like they want to charge us for it, and it actually looks AI generated, which, you know, isn't like terrible, but it does look already a little sketchy. Stuff that I wanted to do in my own way, so maybe that's not the best texture to go with. This one kind of has a sunspot flare going onto it, and actually this one I can really appreciate the color of that sunset or early dusk, and it honestly looks relatively flat, right? So that one's actually looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and right click and either open up a new tab, or you can actually usually open image in a new tab. That's usually pretty nice. And very often we'll get the at least the highest resolution of that image. Be careful, don't right click on the thumbnail and save, because often you'll save a really tiny image and that's no good, right? So this would be the old school way I'd find the image. Another way is you can produce the image yourself. You can use AI. In fact, you can go to ChatGPT and say, produce me an image of a limestone rock texture that I would find in Texas, and it's going to give you a very nice one. It's going to take about 35 seconds to produce, so I'm not going to necessarily go over that today. But again, architectures, Pimp My Drawings, and again, AI are definitely some very useful ways we can grab and materialize some of these items. So let's continue and get some of that sky involved first. And the best way to do that is to literally drag and drop it if you're on a Mac. Honestly, it just kind of drops right in there. Another way to do it, in my case, doesn't look like it's working today. That's okay. We'll go to File, Embed, right, or Place Embedded, and of course take that image. Now, of course, I need to save the image first. Duh. File, Save As, and we'll just put it on our desktop for today. And we'll call it Sky. We'll go ahead and embed that image, and in my case, I'm going to start a new layer first by clicking the new layer, and we're going to go ahead and call it Sky. In fact, I do remember going over this a couple times. We can go ahead and even put some of our layers, such as people, rails, surfaces, those kinds of things. That way you just don't forget. But other than that, we'll go ahead and go to our sky layer and File, embed that layer, or that image, my bad. It's on my desktop, sky, and let's go ahead and place that. It is super duper tiny and cute. And to be fair, it is going to start to get pixelated, right? The bigger and bigger we get this. However, I do want to cover a majority of the sky, and it does give me some options. Obviously, that one's a lot darker. That one kind of has almost too much brightness to it. And maybe there's kind of a happy medium. Maybe I cover a little bit of that hot spot going on. And for the most part, I do want to make sure that it gets at least to the ground. I'll hit Enter to basically save that, and essentially put it behind my layers, right? So that's pretty nice. Again, the position that it is in the layers is actually where it starts to show up, right? So definitely helpful, definitely useful. But as you can see, man, the sky is like what this image is about. It's no longer even about the architecture. In fact, it almost looks completely transparent, and it really is, right? So we need to further refine it and, of course, make it right. Now, in my case, very often what I like to do is just take it down 50%. To be fair, honestly, it's going to print out at 100% because naturally when it prints out, it's a little bit darker. Now, if you're on the Wacom screen, usually it does a little bit better in terms of color. You might have to turn it down 75% in order to kind of get the same feeling. Now, to be honest, on the projector, you can't really tell this too much. It just kind of looks bright for some reason. Like right now, wow, it's just wildly different colors compared to my screen. So again, every screen is a little bit different. This is where we really have to start to get into the idea of what colors we actually want. And to keep in mind that color isn't necessarily the most important thing. What is the most important thing about your section, guys? The section part, right? Now, don't get me wrong, we do add this context, which is normally what it's referred to as, in order to enhance our architecture, but we don't want it to cover up the architecture. However, for right now, I need to basically either delete from the sky, right, or delete or create white, right? So for instance, there's a couple of options here, right? If I have a lot of stuff, it makes a lot of sense to just, well, delete the sky. So for instance, I could use my magic wand tool. I can make sure I'm on my vector smart layer, right? So let me just relabel this lines. So obviously I have my line work. And in my case, if I hit that magic wand tool, it's gonna try and get everything, right, that's in there. Right? And as you can see, it's finding like random little things. So I'm gonna turn off the sky real quick. Ah, okay. Yeah, so it's basically finding a lot of things where I need to decide. Do I see the sky through these elements or do I not? I may even need to turn it down a little bit more so that I can really start to grasp that. Maybe not the lines, but the sky. Let's turn that down. Maybe a little bit more. Obviously, I don't want to see the sky through my poles, right? So in my case, I'm going to go back to my lines. And quite simply, I'm going to hold shift and add to my selection. Anywhere basically I don't want to see the sky through it. So obviously I have this big object right here. And you'll notice that I'm using my piece now more or less like a coloring book, right, to say the very least. Now in my case, I'm kind of faking it till I make it. But essentially picking the spots or pieces that I definitely know that I don't want the sky to be in. So in my case, definitely these surfaces or these elements. Obviously I don't want it in the ground. And I do want it right here, so I'm not going to click there. And as long as you have closed lines, you'll have no problem with this. Definitely don't want to see this guy there. Now keep in mind, yeah, I should have turned mine up more. You know, do as I say, not as I do, as they say. But then I'll switch to my sky layer and I'll hit delete. It's going to say, are you sure you want to do that? And I'm like, heck yeah. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And if it didn't do anything, that might be because it's telling you, hey, this needs to be rastered, and that's totally fine too. So you'll right click on that layer and of course turn it into a rasterized layer. In some cases you might have to convert it first, but there is typically a rasterized layer, right? So of course do that first. Then you'll have your selection, hit delete, and of course then it will delete from that. But already looking pretty close, right? The architecture is definitely starting to stand out a lot more, and you can actually see that I've missed some sections of sky. We have like these kind of floating elements. Totally fine. We go back to our lines. Again, I hold shift and I can still add to that selection. I don't necessarily have to start over. Again, just kind of faking it until I make it. To be fair, I forgot, honestly, how much and what I did to this piece. So all I know is that I definitely don't want to see the sky in the structure. So I'm going to start there. Another way that we could tackle this is to redraw our lines in a weird way. I mean, don't get me wrong, the magic wand tool is definitely useful, especially if you have closed lines, but we don't always have closed lines. Oops. Didn't mean to hit C, my bad. We'll go back to the sky, delete, and again, not too shabby. We're really starting to get much more of the elevation quality out of it, and you're starting to actually see some of those surfaces. However, we're not finished yet, and as you can see, I got a lot of stuff, so theoretically I have a lot of surfaces going on. But you'll see in that structure, man, I still have these intricate spaces where, don't get me wrong, I shouldn't see the sky necessarily through that. So again, I might want to do it the hard way and just continue, if you will. I'll use my magic wand tool and again keep selecting, but as you can see, this can become tiresome and kind of useless, right? It takes a while, right? Another way that we could do this is actually just use our regular selection tool, and by default, if you'll notice that you can actually change some things about it. You can stay in a rectangular shape or a circle shape, and again, that might be really nice if you need that circle, or again, in our case and most architectural cases, usually we have orthogonal lines. So don't get me wrong, you can do Command D to deselect what you have, go back to your lines, and of course select your own. If you hold shift, you can also add to that selection. So again, keep in mind that well, I have all these rails. Do I need to do that? Yeah. Right? Another way you can do this is, well, what do you call it? Adding a hatch, right? Actually drawing the hatch in Rhino or Illustrator if you're so inclined. But you can also go back to the sky and of course delete those little layers. So again, pretty nice. But let's say I was finished with that. Let's go ahead and get my structure after all. And we'll use the Apollo Lasso tool for this one, just to kind of show you what I mean. And in my case, yeah, we probably shouldn't be able to see the sky through the top rail, so let's change that as well. But you can essentially trace it with a polygonal lasso tool. I'll hold spacebar so that I can pan. That one probably could have been done with a rectangle selection tool, but that's okay. And again, just like last time, I know I went over this, you can also double click to close. You can hold shift again to add to that, and I'm pretty sure I went over that last time too. You can hold other buttons to of course subtract a selection or add to a selection. But as you may see, yes, I do only have to trace it once. That is the good news, right? But I do need to go to the other layer and of course delete it. That way my rails pop ever so nicely. But that's looking pretty good. Let's get the rest of that structure. So again, I'm going to use a smart tool for it. I'm going to go ahead and use my selection tool. I also noticed that I have some leftover lines that I forgot to delete in Illustrator, but not a big deal. And again, just selecting things that I know I don't need in terms of the sky. Really just deleting the sky here. And again, if it overlaps, I don't necessarily have to make that perfect. But I can get the whole swath of area, and of course delete. Another way to do it is just brush it in too, but that usually takes a lot longer than it appears. And as you can see, I got a weird situation where I can see the sky and I can't see the sky. I'm going to go with the magic wand tool for that one. Again, make sure I hit my lines and hold shift, right? Another way to do it is of course to change the tolerance like I just did there. So it's at a 10 tolerance. You'll see if I go to the sky now and delete. Well, that didn't work. Let's try and get the inverse. I think I showed you guys that last time as well. Select the inverse. You can do it that way too. Not quite. It's always worth a shot. And again, in digital, what's nice is you can always do edit, undo. However, let's get this fine-tuned. I should be able to see through all of that. So actually, lasso tool, that seems a lot easier, right? Just trace the whole damn thing. And of course, go to the sky and delete. So again, really deleting parts of the sky. In fact, you'll see if I turn everything off, that we kind of have this like weird exoskeleton, if you will, of the sky. So keep in mind, I should have, I definitely can't rearrange my sky now. And in fact, if I get to my sky layer, I do Command T and transform, I can't just move it. It's kind of locked in because I've literally deleted some of those pieces. Another way is to mask your layer, but I find that actually confuses some students pretty heavily. So instead of deleting, you can also just make a mask layer, mask all objects, and you can do it that way too. Again, I find it a little confusing, and again, if we're kind of finishing up, we're finishing up. This is what's known as post-production, right? This is kind of the final drawing, if you will. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's imperative that we keep necessarily some of this information. But already right there, guys, that's looking pretty nice. Already pretty realistic. Another way that we can take it to the next level is, of course, going to sky and adding a slight Garcinian blur. Why is it called Garcinian blur? Well, I think it's to do with some guy named Garcinian. But if you go to blur, you can go down to Garcinian blur. We'll use that on our sky layer, and very often I just add a little bit of a radius in there, just to give it a little bit of fuzz. Again, it's about the architecture, not necessarily the sky. So I do want it to kind of fade that way, kind of fade around my architecture and not literally compete with it. Now keep in mind, this is at a very, very minute scale, right? So it's gonna fuzz it out a little bit, but it's something that Toy Story 4 people are gonna notice. They're gonna notice the slight imperfections and actually makes it look a little bit better, a little more human, and a little less finished. Bless you. But in our case, we definitely have tons more to add, and we can definitely still go back and fix some things. But I do need to move on. That way we can get to the rest. Let's add some people. Let's add some more information to this. For instance, maybe a tree in the foreground, or just kind of in the information. Like, for instance, right now we kind of have this like just on a plateau of some kind. There's nothing in the background. So one of the tools that I could use is AI, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I could also just brush these in. Very often, one thing that I like to do is quite literally draw them in. So I'll literally like put some mountains in the back, those kinds of things. Now you may have something that's not a mountainous region, and there's that too. But I could take something like this, I can make a new layer and call it background mountains. Or maybe I have a background city, or again, maybe it's an urban landscape of some kind. But I definitely want to put that information. That way I start to kind of hide, obviously, the bottom layer of that sky. But I'm going to put it actually towards the back. So in my case, right above the sky. And just brush that in. I'm going to go with kind of maybe slightly lighter than, say, my poche going up. I'm going to use B for brush, and use way bigger brushes than that. And scale back my hardness. I kind of want like a fuzzy line to it, and that's definitely not fuzzy. So let's use something like a dry brush. And we can definitely add that stuff in. Again, I like it to be a little bit sketchy, you know, a little bit of texture in there. I'll show you another way that we can do this. The reason I kind of like it this way is because it still feels like it's done by me, and not necessarily just a computer. But I kind of like the ability to kind of fuzz it up a little bit. And I can darken it a little bit more at the bottom and give it those slight highlights at the top. Again, I'm going to actually turn this way back. Anyway, right? And actually, let's go ahead and put that behind this guy. Oh no, I think I drew it on the wrong layer. Okay, never mind. I did good. Let's put it. Oh, it's because I deleted it. I might have to delete it also from those pieces. Not a big deal. Let's go ahead and do that. In my case, super easy. I'll just get the whole thing and trace it. Boop. I can hold shift to maintain a straight line. As you can see, working with the mouse can be slightly difficult, but I just need to get rid of all of that. Double click. We'll go back to that piece, and who wants to sit there all day erasing when you can just make a bigger eraser? Not too shabby. Command D or Control D to deselect something. And again, in some cases it might be easier to use the magic wand tool and go to my lines, and I can easily do that. Take those pieces, that piece, and again, make sure that I don't have necessarily unwanted mountains everywhere. Probably should have just got that one whole piece. There's a lot of pieces going on there. But again, you can either delete or erase. But it's starting to look pretty nice, especially at the bottom. It starts to ground it a little bit more. You see that? Right? It just starts to kind of blend in, maybe even looks a little bit more natural, at least now that we have some relative sky. In fact, I would say that's even a bit much. Take it maybe back 14%. Because again, I like kind of that blending of the color. I want to show somebody that it's possible and it starts to be there rather than on this flat plateau. The next thing I can do is just like Bob Ross, I start to add some trees. Now, to be fair, obviously the farther the tree is back, the more blurred it should be, right? It's farther from you, so it has less detail. Now, if it starts to get really close, it should be more detail, right? However, in an elevation in a section, it should remain the same height. It's not going to start shrinking as it goes back. That would be a perspective. However, to get some of the trees involved, that one's looking pretty cool. We'll add a DWG or an AI file. Honestly, I'm going to go with the AI file today. And I want to show you how to work with some of these trees. Honestly, I think they're a little bit easier to work with in Illustrator and then drag them again to Photoshop. So I do want to show that. But in my case, let's just call it tree example today. So we'll put that on my desktop, tree example 1. And let's get a second tree in there. I like this one. Tree example 2. Sweet. And again, I'm going to use these back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and open both of those trees up. Desktop, tree example, tree example. I'll go ahead and open those two up. And by default, you'll notice they're pretty together. There's not an explode command in Illustrator, but there is in a way. In fact, you'll realize that, well, there's actually an outside layer and an inside layer. You may just want the silhouette effect and actually brush that in yourself. So again, much more like a coloring book situation where I get to control the line weight of the coloring book and also, of course, the color. But that being the case, I kind of like the interior lines, especially for the foreground, and less interior lines and silhouette-like for the backgrounds. So we can do that one at a time, actually, and you'll see what I mean. So by default, in Illustrator, you'll notice in order to explode something, you do have to click on it, edit, and basically expand it. Or sorry, object, and basically expand it. Where to go? There it is. Expand. So not explode, but expand. And in my case, it's going, hey, do you want to simple it to its easiest fill and easiest stroke? Yep. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And as you can see, it's still together. You'll click on it and you'll have to ungroup it. You'll click on it and it's still together, right? So generative expand. You'll click on it and it's still together. However, if you go to your direct tool and double click on it, you should actually have individual lines, which, don't get me wrong, is sometimes great, sometimes horrible. In our case, this one's actually all one continuous line, which is actually great because I could just select it. I should be able to select it. Let's maybe, oh, okay, there we go. And I should be able to change it still. By default, it does look pretty thick. But in my case, I'm going to go with like a light line weight going on there. And obviously take that way down, 0.125. And that doesn't look at all like what I selected. Let's see what's going on. Let's put my layers back where they belong. Ungroup, they're still grouped, son of a... Retype, release. Ah, there we go. So as you can see, there's multiple objects inside these. And there's a reason why the guy, I at least Pimp My Drawing, definitely put them all together. And as you can see, you can sit here and you can start deleting maybe a little bit too much. In my case, I'm not too worried because I'm just using these as backgrounds, but probably should have picked a less complex tree. As you can see, there's a lot of parts in here. Not too shabby. Not too bad. I didn't have to trace any of this, so I am already saving some time, I guess. But as you can see, it does take a little bit of extra work. And, well, as long as you do this once, you don't really necessarily have to do it again. In fact, you can create your own little folder of edited Pimp My Drawings, right? That way you don't essentially have to do this for every project. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it. Very often you can find a nice student in Studio who's already done this, and you can trade assets. I can't tell you how many times I saw Professor Tunks. He would watercolor all of his trees, scan them, and then put them in all of his Photoshop drawings. Definitely worth your time, but if you don't know how to watercolor, maybe not, right? But as you can see, we can really dial it in. I could also try and select this object and go with a select similar, like appearance or even fill color, and it might just get all of it, so you might have to be careful with that, but actually in my case it worked out pretty nicely. However, again, I'm trying to dial it in, so I'm going to take everything there and get that a little bit better. Let's go with a 0.2 and a little bit more solid color. There we go. Ah, now it's ours, and now it's looking pretty good. But from there, essentially I'll take everything and literally drag it right into Photoshop. And voila, we have a tree. And even better, we have it on its own layer. and it's already ready to go. And we can still use it. We can still magic wand it. So again, it's really important that you kind of edit these trees first. Don't just drag them in, even though technically you can, right? But not always in the best, right? But let's get some of that information. Some of these are maybe in the back, right? So maybe I kind of want that behind my building or among the trees. I don't know. Let's go big or go home. Right, that's looking pretty sweet. Obviously don't want that in front of my architecture, so I'm going to put it towards the back. And as you can see, it kind of gets in the back. No? Uh-oh. There's some things in the way. What do we do? What do we do? It's okay. We'll take our selection tool, and again, we'll delete that part of the tree we don't need. So in my case, make sure it's on the tree, and erase. So in my case, it's going, hey, you can't erase this. Are you crazy? But it's going to automatically raster it for you. And of course, now the tree looks like it's behind our object. However, at the top, it's already kind of transparent up there. That's actually looking okay. But I would say the tree is starting to compete with the architecture. It's almost too white, right? So there's definitely a couple of options there. We could lower the transparency. After all, most trees, if you look at them, you can see through them if you actually, maybe not super transparent like they're invisible trees or anything. But very often we definitely we'll expand on the transparency of things. We'll over exaggerate some of the things about our context. One thing I would say about it right now is what's nice is it's not competing with the architecture too much, right? And especially if I start to put a person there, it really makes this really well composed moment. And as you can see, it's really starting to put us somewhere, maybe in the middle of did I drop something? Oh, my bad. Obviously where we'd find these trees, but again, what's nice about this is I can Command C and B, and I can add some more trees. And what's nice about that is, especially in Photoshop, I think it's honestly a little bit easier to change things. For instance, maybe I want multiple trees going on there. I can change the scale really easy. Another thing that I could start to do is manipulate it, I think arguably easier. So if I hold shift, I could do something like that and flip it. I kind of want that arbitrariness, if you will. Maybe that one's a little bit shorter. Enter. And let's paste that again, maybe on the other side. These will be my badass tall trees. But again, you got to compose it. You can definitely overdo the trees, and you can definitely underdo the trees. I know, sometimes these tutorials make it look really easy, but this comes after years of practice, right? But that's starting to look like a pretty nice situation. All it needs is some people, so definitely not too bad there. However, what's also nice about this that maybe I haven't covered is these background objects, so all those trees. Make sure you're labeling things. Can't express that enough. You can also flatten that image, or merge layers, and you can call them trees. So what's kind of nice is you can consolidate still. And again, maybe you have a professor that goes, hey, I want to see your trees actually as green. You're like, oh, okay, I'll make some green trees. All right, so we can actually take that layer, image, adjustments. We can go to replace color. And you can actually eyedrop that color. So make sure you do actually get it. And it shows us almost like this black and white situation. And you'll notice you can control the amount, such as the threshold called fuzziness. I think that's cute. Anyway, but if we wanted to change that to say like a dark green, or again something else, right? You can of course still change those colors. Now obviously I still need to delete some of those trees from the background, so I'll go ahead and do that too. But now you can see it's starting to compete with really the section. I don't know, I just don't like that look as much. Another thing, we can change the fuzziness, of course get a little bit more green. And to be fair, if it's stuck in a black and white mode, and it does look like it is, keep in mind that we will need to rasterize it first, otherwise it has no idea what color is. So right click, convert to a smart object, and then very often we have to rasterize it as well. So again, when in doubt, when you notice some adjustments not working to layers, when in doubt, turn it to a smart layer and raster it. Now keep in mind, you can't really undo that, but I can also just re-drag in another object if I accidentally mess it up too much. So don't get me wrong, in the same way that we can save ourselves in Rhino and make a copy of our previous step, can't necessarily do that in Photoshop. There is a history method, like if you go to the window, you can actually go to the history. And essentially you can go back to each thing, but be very careful with this. It's a very easy way to accidentally ruin your entire drawing. I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally clicked on like my first step and I accidentally started to continue and I lost all that history of me working on the drawing. So I don't like to show that too much, but if you stick around towards the bottom, like say go back a layer or two, like for instance convert smart object, you can go back, right? So anyway, just want to throw that out there. You can go back, but only so far, right? At least in Photoshop. However, I find that window kind of confusing, so I usually don't use it too much. Eventually you practice with these so much that it becomes second nature. However, in our case, another way to fake it till you make it is just using an eraser, right? I mean, get rid of things you don't need. You don't necessarily always have to make it perfect. And I will say, especially in situations like this or in my tutorial, again, I'm just trying to show you multiple ways that we can use this. So again, I'm trying to hide the trees from the architecture. And I want to make it look like the trees are behind the architecture. So in my case, doing my best. Fake it till I make it, right? And that's looking pretty good. And a little bit there, right? Maybe that should actually be behind. Anyway, not too shabby. But let's go ahead and change the color of those trees. Maybe I do want them to be green. Sorry, I totally forgot what I was doing there. Adjustments, replace color. Again, select the color that you want. And it should actually start to turn green. If it doesn't freak out first, please don't freak out. I know I got a lot of stuff open. I know I'm recording the screen. Please. And honestly, on a Mac, guys, whenever you see the spinning wheel of death, don't click. I know it's tempting. You want to click. I know you do. I even do. But don't do it. In fact, sometimes you can actually click on other items. Like, you know, it's actually Photoshop that's freezing, not necessarily like another program. So sometimes you can get away with closing some programs, and that can help too. So I'm not going to save that one. Don't save. We'll see if that helps out a little bit. I'll also close my Rhino, and hopefully that'll help a little bit. I also didn't save, so I'd really like this to not crash. We'll give it a second. However, we still have about 20 minutes of this tutorial left. Right now, are there any questions or obviously stuff that you want me to go over that you plan to achieve in Photoshop? Keep it on the back burner of your mind, right? Obviously write down a question if you have it. I can't tell you how many times like during the tutorial there's no question, but as soon as I'm done with the tutorial it's like, wait a minute, I remembered my question, you know. So again, write those down, and it looks like, oh man, we're still loading. Maybe I can get away with it. No, I don't even want to click. Don't do it. Whatever you do, don't click. Don't do it. What is that? Blur something? Okay. Definitely. We can use Gaussian blur like I used on stuff, but you may have noticed there's like 8 different blurs there. Honestly, they all kind of do something a little bit different. Experiment with it. Basically select a layer, go to, in my case I can't even read it. I'm gonna have to do the click. Let's see what happens. Oh wait, try escape first. You know, another way. Let's see if it's responding. No, it's not responding. That's the problem. It's because I'm recording it, isn't it? I'm gonna give it 1 more minute because it's totally worth it. I might be able to get a recovery file out of it, and yeah, we still are recording, so that's good. Alright, I've become impatient enough. Force quit. No! Hopefully it saves some of that. I doubt it. Yes, but it didn't get the trees. That's so sad. Anyway, it got some of it, but as you can see, changing those trees was pretty bad. However, I should have saved my tree. See, this is why you save your assets. That way you don't have to necessarily do them over again. However, for the sake of tutorial, let's see what happens when I don't do any editing to it. Why not, right? I've shown you the right way to do it. Let's show you the wrong way too. That way you at least know. And as you can see, I can do absolutely nothing to this tree, and it's really competing with my architecture now. I mean, that's, ugh, it looks like a hairy leg of some kind. And nobody likes that. Anyway. But as you can see, I could fake it till I make it and make the best of it and really turn it down. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can make the best of it, right? But as you can see, it's not exactly ideal, right? That you have really strong lines in your illustration. Ooh, oh God. Anyway. But as you can see, I've shown you the right way and the wrong way in that situation. But in our case, let's also get some people in there and some color. By all means, you don't necessarily have to keep this white. And I could actually want other surfaces. So I did put a surface layer, and maybe I want some sort of accent, or keep those colors that essentially that I was kind of using in my rendered views. Some of you guys had an accent color and those kinds of things. So again, go back to surfaces. We'll go to lines in our case actually and use a magic wand tool. So we'll take all those pieces that we need. And in my case, I'll select surfaces and brush it in. Maybe I want to go for my iconic Frank Lloyd Wright red. And in my case, brush it right in. I'm going to use a big brush because I don't want to be here all day. And I can hold shift and really brighten that in and make it straight. That's a bit much though. I kind of want some more softness in there. Oh, there we go. It's a little bit more soft. I hardly could tell. We'll keep that size, but again, I kind of want like a fuzz. Where's my fuzz? No, that's still not so great. In my case, I'm going to change the opacity. That might help us out a little bit. Nah. However, what's kind of interesting about Photoshop is if you remain the same click, it'll keep the same opacity, and it won't like double up your layer. And again, clearly I'm using a lot of processing power, as it's really kind of struggling. But again, we can add color. And what's nice about that is as soon as you have that piece, you don't necessarily have to ever get it again. I think I went over that last time, but you can use your magic wand tool to of course select the inverse. And of course change that color, or obviously if I wanted to add some more character to it, maybe some darks, some lights, some shadows, those kinds of things. Turn all these back on. Again, use my brush tool and get some of that darkness in there. I don't know. That's a bit much, don't you think? Let's get some of that fuzz. Kind of like that. Not that. Could go for like a gradient style, but that's honestly it's a bit harsh of color. Let's go back to my reds and just give it a slightly different color. There we go. Let's give it some more opacity. There we go. Again, Toy Story 4 goes a long way, giving it a little bit of that shade and shadow. Not too shabby. But for today, I know we have about 10 minutes. What else am I forgetting? Let's get some people in there. Really, it's about the same as the trees, but it'll complete this drawing quite nicely. She looks pretty cool. Let's get her. People. Who else looks like they're observing? That guy totally looks like he's observing. Wait, that guy looks like he's observing too. Cameraman. Good deal. So we'll save both of those. We'll do it the right way. Right? Of course, we'll open up an Illustrator first. And again, we'll expand like crazy. I mean, keep in mind, you can also... Alright, let's get that in there. Dang it. I hate when I mess that up. There we go. You can also select these objects as a whole, and very often you can go to properties and you can really expand and release from here. But release is another way of calling, you know, now you can see that we can get the individual lines. And again, now we can change the line weight, hopefully, as you can see. You can also double click on lines. Keep in mind it's more like an isolation mode. There we go. And my interior lines, as you can see, this one's built a little bit better than the tree was, right? It actually is one continuous line. Her face is looking a little too dark to me just because there's so many lines really close together. And I'm not gonna lie, it is really weird when people start to put faces, I think, on scale figures. It's like looking back at you, it's just kind of weird. In my case, I'm just gonna get rid of the interior lines. I think that's plain and safe for today. Nope, other ones. In my case, I did release them first, so I mean, I may need to go back to my layers and actually just delete that as a whole. There we go. So we'll get that all together and just delete. Oop. But as you can see, a lot better in terms of getting that. I use my eyedropper tool to, of course, match that. And if I did want to have some sort of surface, right, I could take that piece and, of course, put it the opposite too. So that's looking pretty nice. That's the kind of scale figure I like to do, kind of a gray. Sometimes it calls for black scale figures, sometimes it calls for white scale figures. Honestly, I would avoid trying to mix and match and use multicolored scale figures. That's a really great way to confuse somebody. And don't get me wrong, I even had a professor one time go, then it starts to get racial as soon as you start like making scale figures different colors. He kind of had a point. Anyway, not exactly imperative. But in our case, you can also copy and paste these, which is pretty cool too. But again, just drag and drop. There's nothing wrong with that either. So drag, drop, and comes right in. But as you can see, that's maybe not the right color for today. It's blending in way too much with the background. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. And I'm gonna go with a white scale figure. I think that's gonna pop really nice against that background and the section and the architecture itself. So again, let's switch that to white. You might have to double click. Might have to switch that to a white. And we'll switch that to slightly grape. It's pretty sweet. Ooh, it's kind of thick too, so I'm gonna half that at least, or third it. Also, I lost my little piece in there. I didn't really, it's just kind of hard to see because it's entirely white. I'm gonna have to guess it or find it. Oh, is it gone? Did I delete it? Oh, there it is. So I need to push this to the back. So sometimes you have to do that. And usually you can arrange something right here and basically send it to the back. And that piece that was invisible should be there. Damn, where is it? What? It's locked. Anyway, oh, there we go. I was in isolation mode, no big deal. Add a little bit of thickness and take away the stroke before I have one. Sweet. That should be a lot better. Let's go ahead and take the whole thing and drag it again. Again, what's really nice is saving those Illustrator files, guys. In fact, I'm even going to save it for my tutorial today. Even though for the most part, I like showing you the multiple different ways that you can do something. Obviously hold shift so that it stays proportional. And do your best to, of course, make an actually decently sized person. Most of the time, a guardrail will come up to your waist. Now, if she's a little bit shorter, she's going to get a little bit shorter, right? Now, of course, she shouldn't be floating, and her feet should exactly touch the ground. We'll say she's particularly tall. And as you can see, maybe I should have just left that transparent. However, it's not the end of the world. I can take this piece right here. I can even magic wand tool it. Maybe. Maybe not. Oh, gotta increase the tolerance to, like, say, I don't know, 32. Ooh, still not working. What's going on there? Let's see. Erase? Nope. Oh, and when in doubt, needs to be a smart object. So even though it says it's a vector object, doesn't necessarily mean it turned into a smart object. So I'm going to convert it to a smart object. And of course, rasterize it. In my case now, I should be able to delete her legs. And I should be able to magic wand tool it now too. So again, magic wand tool. And it looks like I'm still getting her whole body, which is pretty weird because that looks pretty close to me. Let's try it again at 12. Nope. When in doubt, just trace it. Honestly, that is so tiny, you can almost see the pixels going on now. Not a big deal. Looking pretty sweet. She actually needs to be behind the architecture lines. So in my case, we'll put her right behind the lines. Now, I don't have to do that all over again. Copy, paste, get another one. Oh, copy pasted the wrong layer, my bad. Take that one, copy, paste. Where'd it go? Oh, same area. What? There we go. Obviously, I'd want to put people in multiple situations. You don't want to just have one lone person. And you can even put them on the back steps. And we'll get somebody. Now, this is where you might actually need to change the person, right? Or at least get a maybe more defined line. Keep in mind, you should be able to click all of that. And of course, brush in another color. In my case, maybe a slightly darker white. That way we can see her. So don't get me wrong, sometimes you have to break the rules, but make sure you're breaking the rules for the right reasons, right? Even though what's kind of funny is it almost, you know, if you never told anybody or saw that, you might assume that that was even the same color. I could probably go a little bit darker there. Do that again, brush, and go a little bit darker. Just a tad. I don't know. I'm kind of a perfectionist. But that's looking pretty good. And we'll basically end it there for today. Again, amazing what we can do in terms of, honestly, we started off like this, guys. Let's get the sky out of there. Take all those away. Where's my lines? There it is. We really started off more or less like that, which is such a plain drawing. Can you imagine printing that out and having your reviewers or even your professor try to understand what you did versus literally that? Right, very different, right? And really starts to put us there and even starts to really give it a scale. Lastly, we should go over the graphic scale, but I'll go ahead and go over that next time. I'll go ahead and save this. That way I'm not having to do all this over again. But other than that, we'll go right into part 3 next time. And we'll actually switch to this Wacom board and we'll switch to the plan view because we can do a couple of different things in plan view. Now, obviously this specific tutorial works great for section and elevation. And arguably we use a lot of the same tools for floor plan, but we can do different things, obviously in different views. And to be fair, we can do different things in perspectives too. So we'll go over that a little bit more. Anyway, any questions, comments, concerns? All right, we'll leave it there for today.